If you share my view that smartphones have greatly transformed our lives and are now becoming a nuisance, then you should definitely check out the book we're talking about today, Deep Work. By reading this book, you'll learn that if someone is always distracted by their phone, always checking emails and messages, it can lead to a serious condition known as mental disability, essentially impairing the brain. This has scientific support, which we will elaborate on later. The book is essentially a challenge to the dominance of smartphones, and I urge everyone to help spread its important message. I recall a day when I was driving and saw a delivery guy on his bike, handling his motorcycle with one hand and using his phone with the other. Such recklessness is extremely dangerous. This is a common sight, and if we could just keep our phones a bit away, it might save numerous lives. That's why it's essential to understand and practice deep work. The book starts with the story of Carl Jung, a famous psychologist. He had a special attic named Jung's Tower, reserved exclusively for his work. This tower had no electricity, which meant Jung worked only during the day, ensuring focused thinking and writing. After 2 hours of intense work, he would meditate or take a walk. Jung's unique approach led to the creation of many influential works. Jung's Tower is an embodiment of a deep work setting. But what exactly is deep work? The book describes it as focused professional activities in a distraction-free setting that stretch your cognitive abilities to their fullest. This intense effort leads to the creation of new values, skill enhancement, and is difficult to duplicate. Looking back on my life, I've noticed that each major shift was preceded by several sleepless nights, deeply immersed in thought without distractions like checking the phone or even the usual habit of jotting things down. It was a process of relentless mental creation. Creativity happens at least twice, first in the mind and then in reality. The sensation of crafting something in your mind epitomizes deep work. It begs the question, when was the last time you truly immersed yourself in such deep work? Without it, we're just repeating shallow tasks. In contrast, there's shallow work. It's crucial to understand what shallow work is, as it's something you'd want to minimize. Shallow work involves cognitive tasks that require minimal mental effort and are often performed amidst interruptions. These tasks seldom generate significant new values for the world and are easily replicable. Consider tasks you can handle, even in a noisy environment, like responding to non-urgent or unthoughtful emails or continuous meetings. While meetings are important, too much of them turns into shallow work, lacking in deep cognitive processing. The author of this book bases his entire theory on the deep work hypothesis, a universally accepted and self-evident concept. He defines it as the idea that the ability to engage in deep work is becoming rarer, while its economic and social value is rising. Thus, those who can cultivate and integrate this skill into their work life will find success. Steve Jobs, like Carl Jung, often isolated himself in a Zen-like space for deep contemplation. Accordingly, the author predicts that in the future, 3 kinds of people will become more valuable. First are those adept at interacting with machines, such as programmers. They're vital because many companies' progress hinges on skilled programmers. Exceptional product managers and programmers are increasingly in demand for their ability to control machines, a key skill in a machine-driven future. Second are the creators of intellectual property, like superstars such as J.K. Rowling, whose name alone can make a book a bestseller. This demonstrates the immense power of IP. Lastly, capitalists who can invest substantial money into further production will also rise in value. These 3 groups are poised to gain increasing prominence and value in the future. How does one become one of these 3 distinct types of individuals? It requires the ability to swiftly learn and master a complex tool. Simply being proficient with smartphone apps like photo editing doesn't count. You need to master a language or skill that is challenging for most. Alternatively, reaching an elite standard in terms of work quality and speed is crucial. Whether you're quickly picking up a complex machine language or striving to enhance your work performance to an elite level, encompassing insight, creativity, and swift execution, you'll need the support of deep work skills. In our discussions about the book Peak Secrets from the New Science of Expertise, we've learned that adherence to the 3F principle and concentrated practice can significantly enhance one's abilities. The book offers physiological explanations for this. Why does repetitive training in a particular action lead to improvement? It's due to a vital substance in our brain called myelin, which facilitates neural connections. When someone's neurons form more connections, it's because of an increased presence of myelin around these neurons, creating tighter links. Deliberate practice leads to more myelin in the brain. On the other hand, if we consistently engage in shallow work, the quantity of myelin decreases, weakening the connections in our brains. It's really as straightforward as that. This clarifies a common question I get asked: how do I manage to remember and connect more books over time? I used to focus on a single book for a single topic. Now, I can take any topic and weave insights from numerous books into my discussions. I want everyone to grasp the core of deliberate practice. Its biological basis is in the quantity of myelin. Through practice, you can increase the amount of myelin in your brain, leading to stronger neuronal connections. However, some argue that many successful people, including leaders and executives, don't seem to have time for deep thinking. Their days are sliced up by endless meetings, public appearances, handshakes, and signings. How do they manage? The author notes that sometimes, when people reach a certain level of busyness, they indeed have few opportunities for deep work. They can't thoroughly consider every thought before deciding. This is where their teams come into play, as someone beneath them must be engaged in deep thinking. Without this, a company cannot achieve substantial progress. Why do so many entrepreneurs find solace in walking through the desert? It offers a break from the hectic pace of daily life and opens up space for deep thinking. Hence, without the skill of deep work, it becomes difficult to be part of the increasingly valued group in society. What makes deep work challenging? First, our external environment is filled with distractions. Second, there's a measurement black hole. We often don't realize how much time we spend on our phones. Many people find their days passing without accomplishing much, consumed by activities like replying to emails, chatting, or engaging in social media activities. The mobile internet has brought an intriguing phenomenon. The increasing emphasis on social media interactions, like likes and shares, has led to a craving for a false sense of existence. The quality of content on platforms like Facebook is far from what magazines once offered. Magazines underwent editing and careful curation to ensure quality storytelling. They provided content that was genuinely engaging and worth our time, leading us to invest time in reading them. In contrast, the content on Facebook today is often subpar: simple texts, casual photos, or a few emojis thrown together. Despite this low quality, we are still drawn to consume such content. Why is that? The reason is an unspoken rule in social media. If I like your posts, you should like mine in return. In a bid to easily earn likes and feel validated, people post content incessantly. Even low-quality content leads to interactions, feeding into the illusion of presence that keeps us glued to the internet, eagerly awaiting likes on our social media posts. This is an issue difficult to measure. There's also the principle of least resistance. As discussed in Thinking Fast and Slow, our brains prefer to exert minimal effort. When faced with complex tasks, We naturally gravitate towards the simplest ones, such as replying to emails, posting on Facebook, or starting light conversations. We tend to pick the tasks that are easiest for us. Why? Because they require the least effort and still provide a sense of achievement. So, we focus our energy in that direction. I've observed many people who seem perpetually busy, engaged in numerous activities, yet the most critical tasks remain unprogressed. Why is this? Because those tasks present the greatest challenge. Avoiding these difficult tasks prevents entry into deep work, leading to a continual waste of energy on superficial levels. Then there's the fourth and quite detrimental issue: confusing being busy with being productive. People often find it challenging to measure the work of others, so the default metric becomes how busy someone appears or whether they work overtime. Consequently, many people in the workplace adopt a facade of busyness, wearing themselves out as if to validate their efforts. This behavior can subtly impact each one of us. Therefore, it's important to be cautious and not equate busyness with the effectiveness of your work. So what is the true value of deep work? There is a book called Fully Engaged, Using the Practicing Mind in Daily Life, by an author named Gallagher, who conducted research on numerous marital relationships. In these relationships, there were couples who often fought, each harboring intense anger towards the other, fixating on each other's negatives like selfishness or laziness. It was difficult to mediate them since simply reasoning with them or setting expectations proved ineffective. Gallagher and his team then experimented by teaching these individuals to focus their attention, engage in deep thinking, and practice meditation and mindfulness. They were encouraged to ponder the positive aspects of their partner or to concentrate on resolving issues rather than overly criticizing each other. Criticizing others is an effortless act, in line with the principle of least resistance. Why do we naturally criticize and find faults in others when encountering a problem? Because it's the easier option. What's harder is to ponder what can be done more effectively. How can this situation be improved? What can I contribute? Here, the challenge increases. In their studies, these researchers conducted tests and used brain monitoring equipment to observe the brain's responses. They found that simply altering people's thinking patterns and the depth of their approach to a problem could immediately transform the dynamics of a couple's relationship. The essence of Fully Engaged, Using the Practicing Mind in Daily Life, is that the key to problem solving isn't to follow the path of least resistance, but to focus and deeply think, which profoundly affects our brains. It's often assumed that programmers, who spend their days interacting with computers and continuously typing, would find it difficult to achieve this state. Yet there's an example I find particularly inspiring. In The Pragmatic Programmer from Journeyman to Master, the foreword interestingly cites the ethos of ancient stonemasons, using the creed of medieval miners. We who cut mere stones must always be envisioning cathedrals. It's fascinating that a programmer, in teaching programming, would begin with the phrase, "We who cut mere stones must always be envisioning cathedrals." In the foreword of this book, the authors note, "In the grand scheme of a project, there is always an opportunity to express individuality and artisanship. In 100 years, our skills might be viewed as archaic by contemporary construction engineers, much like how today's engineers view the techniques of medieval cathedral builders. But our artisanship will still be honored. This is the joy of a deep worker. A deep worker approaches their task with a sense of reverence, infusing it with their in-depth contemplation, and finds happiness in their work. It leads to the philosophy, I choose to live a life of focus, as it is the best path. The book's author urges us to become profound thinkers. We all belong to the species of wise humans, but our kind has become increasingly superficial. Everyone is consumed by the same thoughts, endlessly scrolling through identical trending topics on their smartphones. Remember how a decade ago daily hot topics varied and differed from one region to another. The concerns in Shanghai were different from those in Beijing, but today people around the world focus on the same issues daily. This widespread herd mentality and the tendency to follow the crowd have become an overwhelming problem. Therefore, it is essential to be cautious and work towards being profound thinkers, rather than succumbing to increasing shallowness. Next, let's look at how to accomplish deep work. There are 4 key principles to follow for achieving deep work. The first principle is to work in depth. This might sound trivial, but it's the core principle of deep work. But wait, let's break down what it means to work in depth. Firstly, acknowledge that the main challenge comes from our desires. We yearn for relaxation, leisure, and shortcuts. We crave the path of least resistance. These desires are constantly barraging us. So how can we control these desires? How can we, like Jung, seclude ourselves in an attic, or like Jobs, find solace in a Zen room, putting our phones aside and thinking earnestly? When I need to write a book outline, I formally inform my family that I will be shutting my door and should not be disturbed. Such a ritualistic approach is crucial. To achieve this, there are a few key steps. Firstly, you need to adopt a personal philosophy. What kind of philosophy? Philosophies vary. One type is asceticism. An ascetic philosophy, like that of a Zen master, means no use of phones, total disconnection from distractions, living simply, and isolating oneself for in-depth thinking. This approach suits writers and mathematicians who primarily need to create and contemplate in their minds. In asceticism, one completely cuts off and disregards all superficial things. The second type is bimodal philosophy. What does this mean? Jung practiced bimodal philosophy, where part of the day is for socializing, relaxation, eating and drinking, and the other part is reserved for concentrated work. Life is structured into 2 peaks, 2 distinct activities. This approach is more relatable for most people, like periodic retreats, a classic example of bimodal philosophy. The third type is rhythmic philosophy, which involves establishing a routine. I believe I use rhythmic philosophy. I read during travels, write notes at home, and engage in these activities when not meeting people. This forms the rhythm of my life. The fourth type is journalistic philosophy. Why this name? It's about immediately diving into deep work whenever inspiration hits. Journalists don't wait for a quiet environment to write. They can immerse themselves in deep work amidst chaos, on trains, or wherever they might be. These 4 approaches are various philosophies of deep work. You can select one that suits you. Are you an ascetic, bimodal, rhythmic, or journalistic type? I might lean towards the rhythmic philosophy. Once you've chosen your philosophy, the next step is to turn it into a habit. Implement it in your life consistently. Initially, you may find it uncomfortable as it goes against your usual habits. But once it becomes ingrained, it will feel more natural. Enduring this initial period is crucial, as the process becomes less tiresome once it becomes habitual. Another method is to make a bold move. For instance, J.K. Rowling, while struggling with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, felt unable to write due to fame-related distractions and her responsibilities as a mother. She couldn't immerse herself in the complex world of the Deathly Hallows. Her solution? She checked into Edinburgh's luxurious Balmoral Hotel, which cost thousands per night, and confined herself there. Spending such an amount daily was indeed a bold move, allowing her to isolate and dedicate herself entirely to her writing. Grand gestures are essential. You must be willing to invest in deep work, which often makes immersion easier. It's not about adhering strictly to Eastern philosophy, which might consider everything as illusions or self-creations. When we haven't reached a certain mastery level, external factors can significantly aid us. This is exemplified by J.K. Rowling, who isolated herself in a hotel to focus on her writing. Take the case of Peter Shankman, a popular author. Facing a tight deadline in the US and unable to carve out writing time, he made an unusual decision. He purchased a one-way ticket from New York to Tokyo, a flight lasting around 15 hours. During this flight, he wrote half of his book. Upon landing in Tokyo, after a brief coffee break, he immediately booked a return flight and completed the second half of the book on the way back. By the time he was back in New York, his manuscript was almost finished. This might seem excessive. Why not just write in New York? Sometimes a change of environment is crucial. Despite its seemingly extravagant nature, this approach was effective, resulting in a finished book. Hence, bold moves can be beneficial. Many companies attempt similar grand gestures, like retreats for their teams, but these often devolve into non-productive activities. Personal grand gestures, on the other hand, are more significant. We need to create such environments for ourselves. Lastly, it's important to balance solitude and interaction. Deep work isn't about complete isolation and non-communication. Institutions like Oxford and Cambridge cherish rituals like afternoon tea, where professors meet in cafes, allowing for the exchange of ideas and sparking creative thoughts. Jung didn't use all his time for writing and thinking. He also spent a lot of time walking, meditating, attending social events and chatting. Therefore, it's essential to reserve some time for social interactions, but the time set aside for deep work must be strictly adhered to. Additionally, treat your work with a business-like strategy. Many people don't track or evaluate their deep work, leading to temporary commitments that eventually revert to previous habits. I advise adopting a business approach to monitor your deep work's progress, which can significantly improve outcomes. Furthermore, it's necessary to have comfortable leisure time. Research shows that a person can effectively engage in deep work for about 4 hours a day, while those who are more disciplined might manage longer periods. For most people, achieving 4 hours of genuine deep work daily is quite impressive. Leisure and relaxation are beneficial as they can boost your insight and restore energy. As we know, focusing intensely is energy-consuming. Extended concentration and self-control deplete a lot of energy, necessitating rest and recovery. There's another issue. Our brains don't easily shut off. Suppose you've been intensely thinking about something serious and decide to stop and rest at a certain point. While you may seem to be resting on the surface, your brain is still actively processing that issue subconsciously. This phenomenon is why many people experience sudden strokes of genius during leisurely moments. A sudden insight or a solution to a problem might emerge unexpectedly during relaxation. This is the benefit of leisure time. When you relax and step away from deep work, inspiration often comes more freely. Insight and energy are derived from these leisurely moments. This is the first guideline. Establish a philosophy, make it a habit, use grand gestures, balance solitude and communication, and track your progress. The second guideline is to embrace boredom. Why do people often turn to their phones when idle? For instance, some motorcyclists, seeking added thrill, use their phones while riding. This behavior is not just risky, it reflects our collective fear of boredom. We are so averse to boredom that we'd rather risk our lives than be without our phones. But this constant distraction has led to what the author describes as a mental disability. Once your brain is used to being distracted, constantly checking phones, for instance, it becomes difficult to break this habit, even when you need to focus. It's not as simple as switching to focus mode when necessary. To be more specific, If you spend every potentially boring moment in your life, like a 5-minute wait in line or waiting for a friend at a restaurant, scrolling through your smartphone, your brain may undergo a reprogramming. This is akin to what the NAS Research Institute describes as mental disability. In such a state, your brain becomes incapable of performing deep work, even if you regularly try to practice focusing. This highlights the importance of embracing boredom. You need to learn to be comfortable with solitude so that your brain doesn't undergo detrimental changes. When our brains are conditioned by constant fragmentation, we become incessantly restless. For instance, I found myself in a troubling habit of checking my phone every time I was stuck in traffic while driving. I was displeased with myself for being so controlled by the need for unimportant updates. In truth, there was no one contacting me, no essential messages. Our reliance on external stimulation has become excessive. Consequently, I've been gradually training myself not to check my phone while driving, not even during traffic jams or at traffic lights. It's in these moments that I'm learning to appreciate boredom. Boredom is beneficial as it allows your brain to slowly learn to focus. Many people experiment with a digital Sabbath, dedicating a specific day or a few hours each week to stay off the internet. However, the author contends this isn't the best approach. Why not? The concept of digital Sabbath suggests that you spend most of your time online, only taking occasional breaks. Instead, the focus should be on occasional distraction. Understand the difference? Occasional distraction means that the majority of your time is spent offline, and you only use your phone during specific predetermined times. This is preferable to being online most of the time and only disconnecting briefly. I've put my 2 phones on silent mode. I don't check them unless it's the scheduled time. This makes it challenging for people to contact me, but that's intentional. I need to engage in deep work, and I can't let others dictate my schedule. If I were to respond immediately to everyone, I couldn't read as much or do the things I want to. The author also refers to a learning method used by American President Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt, even in college, was a published naturalist with professional-level papers on birds. Despite his deep involvement in this field, his performance in other academic subjects remained high. Why was this the case? Theodore Roosevelt's study method was characterized by intense, concentrated learning. He set aside 6 hours each day for study, with no distractions, aided by the absence of modern technologies like smartphones and TVs. This approach allowed him to pursue his passion as an ornithologist while excelling in his academic studies. This is known as the Roosevelt study technique. When he was studying, he was undisturbed. Take Immanuel Kant, a philosopher who never left his hometown. His daily routine was so consistent that the local townspeople used it as a clock, as actual clocks were scarce. When Kant went out for his walk, people knew the time. His disciplined life and deep contemplation during his walks were integral to his status as a great philosopher. Therefore, the second guideline is to embrace boredom. Boredom isn't something to dread. Learning to be at ease with oneself and keeping the phone away gradually leads to adaptation. The third principle is to limit engagement with social media. An insightful rule in this context is the any benefit approach, coined by the author. What does this mean? The rationale is not to outright reject social media because it has practical uses. For example, it can be effective for selling products or can be life-saving in emergencies, like helping to find lost children. Given these benefits, the argument goes that we should embrace social media. The any benefit approach implies that we tend to ignore the negative impacts of something if we see even a slight benefit, leading us to embrace it wholeheartedly. There's an intriguing case study about American farmers who own large fields that produce a lot of hay for their cattle. The question arises, should these farmers buy a hay baler? You may have seen those neat stacks of hay, either in square or round bales, created by hay balers. Owning a hay baler would allow a farmer to bundle their hay efficiently. The instinctive thought might be to buy one. As a farmer, isn't such equipment essential to bale your hay instead of purchasing it from others? However, one farmer crunched the numbers and revealed the true cost of owning a hay baler, and it turned out to be quite expensive. The apparent benefit is self-sufficiency. Owning a hay baler means you can process your hay, eliminating the need to buy from others. But what are the downsides? Firstly, buying a hay baler requires a significant investment. Secondly, processing your hay could lead to tax implications. Thirdly, dedicating time to baling hay means less time for other farm activities like livestock breeding. When all aspects, investment, yield and opportunity cost, of acquiring a hay baler are considered, it often makes more financial sense for a typical farmer to purchase pre-baled hay from others, as it is more cost-effective. This example illustrates how many people forego in-depth analysis and pursue what seems beneficial initially. This is the trap of the any-benefit approach, which can lead to mental fatigue and a lack of focus. I often advise my wife to spend less time on her phone. She counters by saying she's busy with work on her phone. She uses business as a cover for all the time wasted on her phone, constantly holding on to it under this pretext, never willing to put it aside. I'm sure many can relate to this scenario in their own lives. Another important concept is the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule. In your life, 80% of the value comes from 20% of your efforts. In a company, 80% of the productivity or value comes from 20% of the breakthroughs. We should therefore concentrate on those key activities that provide significant breakthroughs, rather than dissipating our energies on a wide array of tasks. A practical method is to consider deleting some apps. The author's advice is to go several days without using certain apps on your phone. After this period, check if anyone has mentioned missing you or not being able to contact you. If there is such feedback, keep the app. If you haven't used an app for a couple of weeks and no one has remarked on it, then delete it and stop using it. This strategy helps to reduce the clutter of apps on your phone. My phone usage is now minimal. I primarily use it to check social media, see if someone has joined my group via QR code, and occasionally for navigation. I barely use any other apps. This minimalist approach helps lessen dependence on these devices. It's also crucial to consider how we utilize the 16 waking hours of our day. Many people believe that the most important part of their day is the 8 hours spent at work. It's common to see office workers starting their day full of energy, only to return home completely drained in the evening. After such an exhausting day, they tend to misuse these 16 hours, barely allocating enough time for sleep. Many even avoid sleeping early, preferring to stay up late watching TV shows. Why do we do this? It's because we often view these 16 hours as a bonus period of the day, a time to be wasted after the important tasks are done, a time for leisure and play. The author challenges this perspective. Aside from the 8 hours of work, the remaining 16 hours should be seen as an integral part of the day. It's important to ensure enough sleep, following the guidelines in Sleep. Redefine your rest for success in work, sport, and life, and achieving at least 5 full sleep cycles. The way you spend the rest of your time is what sets you apart from others. Some may find this approach too demanding. I'm already tired from work. Are you suggesting I exhaust myself even more at home? This concern misunderstands one thing. Our brain functions differently from our muscles. If you work physically for 8 hours and then continue with another 8 hours of physical labor, you would be completely exhausted. But the brain doesn't operate like that. Thinking about one type of problem for 8 hours and then shifting to another type for another 8 hours doesn't necessarily wear out your brain. In fact, generating new knowledge during the day can make your life more enjoyable and relaxed the next day. The brain's mechanism is different from that of physical muscles. Therefore, if your job involves physical labor, I wouldn't recommend spending your remaining 16 hours on more physical work, like driving for Uber. If you're in a mental labor job, or even in physical labor, use your remaining time for mental activities, pondering over things you couldn't during work hours. You might argue that you can't avoid using your phone during work because of your boss. But can you carve out 2 to 3 hours of deep thinking outside work hours? The difference between individuals isn't manifested during the 8 hours of work, but in how they utilize the 16 hours outside of work. This difference in time management outside work hours is what causes varying growth rates among people in the same company. I really resonate with the saying mentioned here. View the 16 hours of your day as a full day, not as a bonus time to waste after work hours. This leads us to the third principle, distancing oneself from social media. The fourth principle is about abandoning shallowness. In essence, all 4 principles revolve around similar themes: engaging in deep work, minimizing shallow thinking, and avoiding excessive internet use. While the concept is simple, the methods proposed in each principle are quite insightful. What does abandoning shallowness entail? There's a case of an internet company that switched to a 4-day work week. This decision caused a stir in Silicon Valley, with other companies worrying about how it would affect their employees, who might demand the same. The concern was, did this mean employees no longer wanted to work as much? The CEO clarified that while they moved to a 4-day week, the amount of work didn't change. This adjustment led to increased efficiency, as employees had to complete the same workload in less time, reducing time wasted on pointless meetings and improving focus on deep work. The rationale for having a free day mirrors Google's policy, where employees are encouraged to spend 1 day a week on unrelated tasks to stimulate innovation. I inquired with Google employees if this meant they could relax on that day, and they said no. The workload remained constant. Thus, maintaining the same workload, but over a shortened work period, actually led to higher efficiency and more personal time for employees. Another concept to consider is the shallow work budget. This means if your boss assigns you a significant amount of shallow work, you should request a budget for it. How does this work? One approach is to propose hiring more interns for your company. Interns can be considered a shallow work budget. They handle the bulk of shallow tasks, allowing younger individuals to take on simple tasks like making bookings, scheduling meetings, or proofreading documents. By pairing each employee with an energetic intern, the interns gain valuable learning experiences. At the same time, it frees up staff to engage in more profound, job-specific contemplations. This approach can significantly enhance overall company efficiency and contribute to individual growth. Therefore, you might want to discuss with your boss about getting a budget for shallow work. Additionally, it's crucial not to overwork yourself. Avoid filling your schedule to the brim with non-stop work. It's essential to allocate time for relaxation, learning, and recharging, which facilitates deeper thinking. Finally, consider making yourself less accessible. In many workplaces, it's an unwritten rule to respond to emails within the same day, or else it's considered rude. But if one were to reply to every email immediately, it would leave no time for other tasks. This constant demand for immediate responses can be counterproductive. Therefore, this book starts to question the established guideline, why must I reply to every email I receive? Many of these emails are just CCs and not particularly important. Many professors have begun adopting a practice. They set up automatic email responses stating, if your matter isn't urgent, I may not reply. Please understand. If you believe your issue is important and valuable, write it down and I'll get back to you after reviewing it. This approach filters out many emails, reducing the necessity to respond to each one. Similarly, I don't answer unscheduled phone calls. Often these calls are either sales pitches or about matters I'm not interested in. I've found that by not answering, those who really need to contact me will send a text message. They can briefly explain their concern via text, and if it's appropriate, I'll respond. By making yourself harder to reach, you can potentially create more value. However, it's crucial to maintain a balance. If you're new to the workplace and adopt this approach, it might lead to issues with your employer. Therefore, finding a balance between politeness and deep work is essential. Utilizing automatic replies or setting a specific email signature can help achieve both courtesy and focus on deep work. So we've discussed the 4 principles: delving deeply into work, embracing boredom, distancing from social media, and shunning superficiality. To briefly summarize, deep work is challenging because it counters the natural tendency we have towards taking the path of least resistance. We often prefer rest, seek to please others, and crave recognition. These can be easily attained through electronic devices and the internet, which often serve to anesthetize us. However, the path of least resistance typically leads to increased entropy. I often bring up the concept of entropy, which is a measure of disorder. For example, a house stays neat when no one is living in it, but becomes increasingly disordered when people move in, an increase in entropy. In contrast, deep work represents a process of reducing entropy. The aging process in humans is also a process of increasing entropy, where we become older and our bodies less firm. Yet, through exercise, better nutrition, and efforts to rejuvenate, we're essentially working against this natural increase in entropy. Reversing the increase in entropy is inherently difficult. However, this reversal is a fundamental aspect of life. We constantly strive to reduce entropy. Photosynthesis is a prime example of this process, where carbon dioxide and water are converted into oxygen, turning chaotic elements into something orderly. Thus, if we wish for our lives to be characterized by the reversal of entropy, to become more efficient and youthful, instead of letting them slacken and descend into chaos, we should earnestly reflect on the importance of deep work. It would be beneficial for various teams to engage in discussions about deep work, identifying specific actions that could facilitate it within their groups. Ultimately, the future favors those who can manage self-discipline,